So before we get into specifics, I really want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances that we are working under. So we are living in the midst of a pandemic that has claimed more than 160,000 lives in the US. And we're in an economy that's under tremendous strain as a result of the pandemic. And also we're in a moment of civil unrest over how structural racial inequalities have worsened the effects of both of these events on Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. So that's a lot. And I know that as a teacher, when it comes to our shortcomings, we have a tendency to blame ourselves. And I want to let you know that it's not entirely your fault because we are basically trying to teach online, trying to provide quality learning to our students while the world is on fire. And those are extraordinary circumstances. So I want you to know that it's bigger than you, and you shouldn't blame yourself or get down on yourself, if you're having trouble meeting deadlines or engaging students and you feel like it's all your fault. It's not. It's the moment in which we are living, and that takes up a lot of mental energy. And so it's not possible. It's not, the situation is not optimal. So I definitely want you to know that and to understand that. But today we're going to talk about some steps that you can take either to recover from burnout or prevent yourself from becoming burnout in the first place. So I want to start by defining burnout. So burnout becomes a term in the 70s with this book, Burnout, The High Cost of High Achievement. And I love this definition of burnout. It says the extinction of motivation or incentive, especially where one's devotion to a cause or relationship fails to produce the desired results. And I really feel that extinction of motivation. It's like, where did it go? Why won't it come back? And even if you're really devoted to something, you just don't have the energy anymore. So that's what burnout is. And I want to talk a little bit about my own mental health. So I have anxiety and depression. I'm on medication for both. So I've always been at higher risk for burnout. So whatever it is that you're feeling, hopefully you signed up for this webinar because you feel like you're close to burnout or you don't want to be burnt out. I can say with absolute certainty that whatever you're feeling, I have been somewhere similar. I'm at very high risk for burnout because of my mental disorders. So what are the symptoms of burnout now that we've defined what burnout is? So there are psychological symptoms and there are physical symptoms. So psychological symptoms of burnout are anxiety, detachment, feeling listless, having difficulty concentrating, lack of creativity, low commitment to your role, loss of purpose, absenteeism is a big thing, irritability, cynicism, emotional numbness, and frustration. These also come with physical symptoms, okay? You can experience exhaustion, generalized aches, headaches, tummy upset, gastrointestinal disorders, hypertension. You can have difficulty sleeping, and increased susceptibility to colds and flu. And Kiana just asked a question, are we good with cams off or do you prefer them on? Either way, it's totally up to you. I'm okay with either. So these are just some of the symptoms of burnout. So go ahead and use the chat because I want to know, what does burnout feel like to you? So obviously you're here, you signed up for this webinar. You feel maybe that you're approaching burnout or you've experienced burnout before. Go ahead and take to the chat and let me know, what does burnout feel like to you? And we'll take a couple minutes to do that and then we'll come back. All right, we got a lot of really good responses, and I want to address these one at a time. So Julia says, getting tired of responding to email. Oh my God, yes. Sometimes it can feel like insurmountable. Like the emails keep coming, and a lot of those emails could be phone calls, or they could not exist in the first place. So yeah, the constant barrage of emails is definitely a thing that's really hard to deal with. Reiki says an underlying dread. I identify with that feeling, because your burnout, you can't do anything, but the things that you have to do keep piling up. And so you have this just feeling of unrelenting dread that you're behind and you're never, ever going to get ahead or catch up. And you still, even that fear can't galvanize you into action. So we got Celeste said mental exhaustion. Shelly says being totally done with something. I get that, Shelly. You know, being totally done with something, even though you're not done, you're done up here. Mental exhaustion, again, from Julia. Oscar says that it feels like you're mentally exhausted, and it can be hard to go through with something that you should probably get done as soon as possible. Yeah. So we have deadlines, we have things to do, and our deadlines don't care if we have burnout, and we have bosses that we have to do things for. And they might not necessarily know what we're going through. The not wanting to do anything, Pamela, I really understand that. It's just the lack of motivation. Thomas says mentally shut down, not wanting to help others anymore. Yeah, that's really heartbreaking. I know what that feels like because I love to help people, but you just are so dried up and you have nothing left. And that's really the sad part, because, you know, we're in a caring profession. And so it's our job to help people. And so when you kind of lose that, it can be really heartbreaking. Fong Do says having to respond to email 24/7 and deal with students who don't read or attend sessions. Keanu had a good comment. So I sometimes feel like I've been running on burnout fumes since halfway into my PhD, but everyone tells me if you were really burnout, you wouldn't be able to do X, Y, and Z. So first of all, that makes me mad. And I want to flip a table because of that. Nobody can tell you if you're burnt out. If you're burnt out, you're burnt out. And I have functional anxiety. So people look at me and they're like, oh, she's always early to meetings and, you know, she's getting a lot of work done. And it's like, well, it's because I'm constantly anxious that if I'm not on time for something that, you know, I'm going to, you know, upset somebody, and I'm in a constant state of anxiety. So it's like, just because it looks on the surface that it's really functional doesn't mean that you don't have some underlying issues. Yeah, checked out, Reiki, going through the motions, all of that. Cecilia says that her dissertation is burning you out. And Cecilia, that resonates with me very strongly. Whenever I was doing my dissertation, I was actually unmedicated, and I had undiagnosed sleep apnea. So I was actually waking up every 7 minutes, struggling to breathe. So I managed to finish, but dang, by the end of that, I had absolutely nothing left. And your dissertation can really suck the life out of you. So I feel that. Bonnie says it is a roller coaster of anxiety and depression. It is true. It just kind of feeds into each other. So you have the anxiety about what you have to get done and what you have to do. And then you have the depression that kicks in when you don't do it and you feel like you can't do it. Like you can't get yourself motivated enough to do it. Yeah. Bonnie, I love that. I am told regularly that I appear as cool as a cucumber. If only they knew about the Jell-O effect. Yeah, and I think that's something to really think about, is we don't know what people are struggling with on the inside. And, you know, somebody like me, like like I said, I have high functioning anxiety. It looks like I'm doing a lot and it looks that I'm really productive, but it's like, you know, I struggle with that a lot. I struggle with the emotions a lot. So thank you so much for taking the time to share what burnout feels like to you. So I want to kind of continue on. So I want to look at the risk factors for burnout, and you guys kind of addressed a couple of those things. So These are risk factors for burnout. So if you identify so strongly with your work that you lack balance between your work life and your personal life, and yeah, this, especially as an academic, so I got my PhD in English. As an academic, they really kind of, indoctrinate you with this idea that as an academic, your work is your calling and your work becomes your identity. And that can lead to a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, because if you fail in your work, you kind of feel like you failed as a person. So if you don't have that work-life balance, if you're too invested, then you can definitely burn out because all you're doing is working. You don't have a life outside of work. And that is a real struggle. That is something that I continue to struggle with. If you have a high workload, including overtime work, especially if you're teaching, if you're a full-time, or I'm an adjunct on the side as well. I've been an adjunct before. It's an incredibly high workload, and you only, the payment is so little, because you only get paid for the contact hours, but you're working way more than that. And you're doing it overtime, right? Trying to be everything to everyone. Oh, this is something that I have a problem with. I really enjoy being needed. I really enjoy people contacting me and needing help. But the thing is, if I spread myself too thin, then how can I be a partner to my spouse? You know what I mean? How can I be a friend to my best friend if I'm trying to be everything to everybody else? So you definitely can't do that. You can help, but you really have to have boundaries with that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. If you work in a helping profession, so healthcare, teaching, you feel like you have little or no control over your work, that can definitely be an issue, especially if you're not getting the right guidance from higher ups and stuff like that. Also, if your job is monotonous. So these are all risk factors for burnout. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can resonate. A lot of these resonate with you. So I want to talk a little bit about the consequences of burnout. So with burnout comes problems, basically. I saw something on Facebook the other day that says, if you don't tend to your wellness, you will be forced to tend to your illness. So I think a lot of times with burnout, or with our needs, we kind of just ignore it until it gets to a crisis point. So the consequences are things like chronic stress. You can experience fatigue, insomnia, sadness, anger, and irritability, alcohol or substance abuse to cope with the burnout feelings. It can also cause physical ailments like heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and you can also be more susceptible to sickness because of stress causes lowered immunity because you're constantly being hit with those stress hormones. So now that we've kind of talked about the consequences of burnout, I have a question for you. So in the chat, go ahead and respond. Which two positions have higher burnout rates? So is it A, firefighters and mechanics, B, librarians and journalists, or C, teachers and physicians? So go ahead and take a moment and answer in the chat. All right, guys, so we've got some good answers. So I love Bonnie saying, well, truly, they're all vulnerable. So for this, it's actually going to be teachers and physicians. And so I know, Robert, I know you wanted it to be both B and C, but it is C. So with teachers and physicians, like I said before, they're part of the caring professions. So teachers do experience a high level of burnout because teaching is a job that has multiple elements to it, and they each present their own kind of emotional and intellectual challenges. So we also experience long hours and a lot of pressure because we're assessed regularly, and our professional success depends not only on our own performance, but the academic performance of our students. So in addition to that, we're having to teach students with a wide variety of different backgrounds, with different emotional and educational needs, and often we lack an official support system for that process. So you can definitely experience things like emotional exhaustion. So this could present as seeking out or needing more time to be alone than previously, feeling frustrated or hopeless, physical exhaustion, feeling tired during or throughout the day, needing to take more sick days, developing insomnia or headaches or anxiety and depression. And then mental exhaustion is, I think a lot of you guys touched on, is feeling unable to accomplish as much as you would ideally each day, feeling like you're losing that ability to creatively assess problems, and then feeling reluctant to take on anything new. Yeah. So, oh, Diane, you're definitely here. So, thank you. So these are some things that, these two positions, teachers and physicians, I want to focus on teachers, but why do we have a heavier workload? Why are we more likely to burn out? And I think that the answer can be found in how much time it takes to prep for online courses. So online courses require more prep time. So this was a survey conducted by, it was the University of Tasmania, and they found that depending on if it was online or face-to-face, it took longer to do an online version. So instead of 8 hours to plan a face-to-face 1 hour lecture, it took 10. Instead of 5 hours to do a face-to-face tutorial, it took 6. And instead of 96 hours to plan a new course unit, it took 100. So this is the kind of unspoken truth about online learning, is that a lot of people think that online students take less time to teach, but really where most of the effort is spent is in the preparation time, right? So yeah, and a lot of people who answered this survey said that they regularly worked on evenings or weekends. So I want to kind of break this down. So this is from another source. This is the Online Journal of Distance Learning Administration from 2016. And their sample size was 23 full-time online instructors, 8 were male and 15 were female. And they actually logged their course per week, how much they spent on things. So for this one, this is hours per week per course by instructor and experience. And so you can see here that a novice person spent more time each week than an advanced person. So it kind of goes down the more experience you have, which makes total sense. So I want to look at another here, is time spent online teaching. So this was actually the hours spent by activity. So the most time was spent on grading and feedback, and the least time was spent on synchronous communication in this study. So this kind of, I'm sharing this with you because I want to kind of validate what you're all probably feeling about online teaching, is that it takes much more work and it takes much more effort. And it's true, it takes more time to prep and it takes more time overall. But there are ways that we can kind of cope with the workload and also avoid burnout. So I kind of want to go over that next. So I use this kind of metaphor of the combustion triangle. So in order to get fire, you need 3 things. You need oxygen, you need heat, and you need fuel. And I kind of revised it a little bit, but I think that heat is your passion, right? Heat is your spark. You already have that, or you wouldn't be in this profession to begin with. You're really passionate about teaching. You're really passionate about sharing what you know with students. But in addition to that passion and spark, you need oxygen, right? And that's what boundaries are, okay? Boundaries allow you room to breathe, because if you don't have enough oxygen for a fire, it's going to go out. And then your fuel is going to be your self-care. So that's kind of the solution for me. So how do we recover from burnout or prevent it in the first place? That's going to be boundaries and self-care. And I will say I still struggle with both of these things. So I'm giving a talk on burnout. That doesn't mean I'm really good at this. You know, I still struggle with all of these things. And it's kind of it's a constant process with some constant upkeep. So I want to talk about setting boundaries. Some of you might be averse to setting boundaries because I think it feels good to give. When you think about it, giving can be a very selfish activity because when we give, we get that other person's gratitude from our gift, and it validates our self-worth. But the thing about boundaries is you shouldn't think about it in terms of like, well, I'm denying people my attention or I'm denying people my help. What you're doing is you're actually preserving your energy, okay? And then if you do that, you have more to give to the people and things that matter, right? Also, I kind of put this quote up here, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, is bull. So I hear this a lot, that people say, you know, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I think that work is really comforting because it can distract us from our emotional state, but it is still work. Work does not replenish. It does not refuel. You have to think about it in terms of input and output, okay? Input is self-care, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Output is work. We can be satisfied with our work, right? We can be deeply satisfied with our work, the work that we're doing, how we're helping people. But the thing is, it's never going to be an input. It's never going to put in. I found that out this week last week, because I took a week off of work just to kind of get, clear my head and give myself a vacation because I've been working nonstop since March. And it was really difficult. It was really difficult to not work because I think work, kind of, like I said, it distracts me from my emotional state, and it also feeds into itself. So it's like I feel good by doing something, and then I want to do that again.
TCC's partial phone system outage has been resolved.
Thank you, TCC. Anyway, it's like, if it's resolved, just don't tell me. It's fine. Anyway, so kind of think of it in terms of like input and output. Like we can be really satisfied with the work that we do, but it is still work, okay? And we shouldn't devalue that, and we shouldn't minimize that. Like it is work, it does require effort, and you need to be putting in as much as you're putting out. So I want to talk about setting boundaries while working from home. This has been really difficult for me. I know that whenever we went online in March, all of us were working at our kitchen tables or wherever we could. And it was really hectic. And so working from home, that boundary between work and home, it's not there anymore. So these are a couple things that you can do to set those boundaries. So one is maintain a schedule. So I think when I first started working from home, it was kind of like a vacation because I could just get up whenever I wanted and do the work and go to sleep. But it really kind of, I didn't have those strong kind of boundaries. So now every day I get up at a certain time. I'm at my desk from such and such time to such and such time. And it's better now. You also want to take a lunch break. I have my planner over here and I actually pencil it in. So it says lunch at noon every single day. You also want to establish a dedicated workspace. So the room that I'm in right now used to be, I don't know what it was. I think it was like an exercise room, but we've turned it into a work room. And I've actually got a sign on the door that says work room. And then I have one of those, it's a sign that lets you know, like, if you're in office or in a meeting. So that's for my spouse. So if right now it says that I'm in a meeting because I'm talking with you all. And that's how we kind of made this into a dedicated workspace. So when we're in here, we don't do anything but work. So if we need to chill out, if we need to read, we go to another room in the house. Definitely get dressed. This was something I struggled with whenever we first went online, is like, you could just do work in your pajamas and it's totally fine. But getting dressed for the day actually does help, because it sets an expectation, and it also it sets that expectation in your mind. Like, okay, I'm putting on work clothes, we're gonna work now. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do the whole thing. You can still wear yoga pants. Nobody's going to see it. But definitely dress nicely, and kind of dress for the day, dress for your expectations for the day. And also clock out at the end of the day. So at 5 o'clock, step away from your computer, step away from your devices. Because I have Teams on my phone as well, and I have my email on my phone. So it's really easy to kind of slip in, while you're watching something, you can kind of slip into your email and see if you got a reply. Don't do it. Just put it, like, I have a stand right here for my phone as well. So definitely clock out formally at the end of the day, to kind of create that separation. Okay, so talking about setting boundaries a little bit more. Who here is a fan of the giving tree? And you can kind of just like raise your hand or shout out if you're unmuted, or you can put in the chat. Anybody a fan of the giving tree? No? Okay, I hate this book. Bonnie says it's a classic. Cecilia said she never read it. Robert says yes. I absolutely hate this book. I really do. And the reason I do is because the tree gives too much, right? So sorry if I'm going to ruin it for you, Celeste or Reiki, but basically the giving tree is a story about a little boy who meets a tree, and as he gets older, he keeps asking more and more of this tree. So he's like, can I have an apple? And then eventually he's like, I want to build a house. Can I use your wood to build a house? And he actually cuts down the tree and builds the house and everything. And then at the end of the boy's life, he's an old man, and he's like, I need a place to sit. And then the giving tree is like, here, sit on my stump. Absolutely hate it. Because it's an example of how when we don't have good boundaries, how that can be really damaging and destructive. So don't turn yourself into a stump for anybody. And there's an alternate version of this. Let me actually copy the link and put it in the chat. Bonnie says, always thought that was twisted psychology. I'm putting it in the chat. This is actually a rewrite of the giving tree, where the tree actually has boundaries and decides, hey, you're not going to cut me down. And hey, I think you're asking a little too much of this relationship. And then in the end, the tree is able to flourish and be there for many other generations of the boy's family, and is able to contribute apples for apple pie and all of that stuff. And the tree is happy, right? and the guy is happy. And so think about it in those terms. If you have boundaries, you can protect your energy, and you have more energy to give to the things that matter. And you can kind of prevent little things from kind of sapping your energy. All right, so go ahead and take to the chat, please, and think about what are some ways you can set boundaries with your online teaching. So give me some ideas. guys, you have a lot of really good responses, so I want to go through these and give them the attention that they deserve. So there's a lot of sticking to your schedule, right? And setting a set time to respond to emails, time management, scheduling specific hours. Fongdo, I really like what you said about email will not be responded to during the weekend or holidays. I usually let students know that I'll get back to them within 24 to 48 hours, but let them know that it'll be longer on the weekends, that I'll get back to them the next business day. Celeste, letting my students know that I am plugged from my devices, email for weekends. I absolutely love that. I was talking about that exact thing with a colleague today, especially when it comes to working from home, and we're all, self-isolating, hopefully, in this pandemic. There is an assumption that, okay, they're home, like they're not doing anything, right? They're not going out, they're not going anywhere. And so a lot of times I get texts from coworkers because it's the assumption that I'm there. Just because I'm there doesn't mean I'm available to work. So I really like that idea of letting your students know that you're not going to be available during certain times. That's a really great idea. Julia says, make sure if she notices a common theme of questions to send an announcement. Yes. Enforcing due dates. So this is really good. I think it's good to have a boundary with due dates, especially with major assignments. I don't tend to enforce those with discussions because they are smaller, and I have what I do is this. So I have assignments. I don't put due dates on them. I let students know when they're due. And then if I have a student who needs to turn in something late, they have to ask me. So I don't advertise that nothing has a due date, because then I would get nothing in until the end of the semester. But that has worked really well for me. But I think enforcing due dates, that's a good boundary to have, because you can't get it all done at the end of the semester and submit grades in time. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Cecilia, I think you're definitely right, is that you have to have some flexibility. So these are all really, really good suggestions for how to have boundaries with your class. So I've got a couple that I came up with, and basically what has worked for me. So set up times to work and stick with it. You guys definitely said that. Julia said, she mentioned doing announcements. It's impossible to comment on every student's post or assignment, and that can get really difficult after a while. Instead, use rubrics. So with rubrics, if you set them up and attach them to an assignment, it will actually let the student know how they did, and they can read those comments. And so it's akin to getting your comments, but you don't have to put as much effort in. And then send announcements that sum up your impressions of the whole class. You can comment on a couple of discussion posts, but then be like, hey, I noticed a lot of you guys were talking about this. And that's one way to engage students, but without the extra effort. Use template replies to answer student emails. We get a lot of the same emails from students, right? Usually about stuff that's in the syllabus. So you can come up with a template email. And a lot of times I think with students, I would put off answering emails until I knew the answer, but that's not always what students want. Students just want to know that they've been heard. So maybe come up with a template email that you can click and be like, hey, I've received your email. I will get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. If you are having issues with the following, this is where you can find that information, and have it just be a form email or an automatic reply. That way you know the student's getting an answer, and then you can follow up later. And you can do that both in Google or Gmail, and you can do that in Outlook. Also, create a spreadsheet of frequently made comments. So we were talking about this earlier. You're going to have a lot of the same comments on students' papers. Like for me, it's always like weak thesis statement, or, this doesn't have enough evidence. So create a spreadsheet of your frequently made comments that you can kind of copy and paste onto student papers, and that kind of streamlines your work. Also, you can do things like track your time. So when you're sitting down, just like with the study that we looked at, kind of when you sit down, think about like, okay, how much time am I spending prepping? How much time am I spending on grading and feedback, and kind of create those categories for yourself. That way weekly you can kind of look and see, oh, I spent a lot of time grading this week. That's kind of out of character. What's going on there? How can I adjust that number? So when you have that data, it's much easier for you to be able to make changes based off of that data. Yes, Julia says, yes, rubrics are awesome. A template email, that's a great idea. I keep writing the same things, definitely. And it's not necessarily the student's fault. It's just they're going to have similar questions. So these are kind of ways you can set boundaries. So the next thing I want to talk about is self-care. So if I say self-care, these are the images that are probably going to float through your brain. It's going to be, mud masks and face masks and jade rollers and serums for your face. Okay, this is not what self-care is. This is kind of what companies who latch onto the idea of self-care want to sell you. Self-care is really basic, and it's a lot less glamorous. So you should not ignore basic maintenance. So you should kind of follow 3 rules. Rule 1 is you have to sleep, you have to eat, and you have to drink, okay? So our problem is that, especially professionals like us, we tend to cheat, right? We sleep, but maybe not enough. We eat, but usually not very well. And we drink, but likely not enough of the right stuff, right? And by that, I mean water. So self-care is very basic. So you need to sleep, you need to eat, and you need to drink, and try not to cheat. And so the next thing I want to cover is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you guys might be, Ricky says, that reminds me, I didn't bring my water back in the room. Go get it, Ricky. So this reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, it's all physiological. You need food, you need water, you need to sleep, you need to eat, and you need to drink before you move up the pyramid. And this is the same thing for your students. So you can model good self-care for your students. So for me, speaking of drinking, I've got a new water bottle here. And what's really cool about it is that it has times here. So it'll tell me from this time to this time, I need to get at this level, or from this time to this time, I need to drink to this level. And then when I get to the bottom, it tells me you did it, refill and repeat. So that's one way I kind of remind myself to drink enough water, right? Because that's self-care. And it's not glamorous. It's not a face mask. It's not, self-care is not something that we can just buy, right? And be done with it. It is consistent, and it is something that you have to be constantly working at. So to that end, I'll just say you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think that's what a lot of us are trying to do. Right now, we're trying to, pour from an empty cup when we have none left. So I also like the oxygen mask principle, where it's like you need to take care of yourself before you take care of others. And you need to put on your mask before you put on somebody else's mask, right? Because if you try to put on somebody else's mask, you might pass out before then. So kind of keep that in mind. I think that it feels so good to care for others because maybe we don't think we're worthy of the same care, or it's easier to care for another person's needs than it is to care for your own. But just kind of maybe pretend that you're somebody else, or pretend that you're your own best friend. And it's like, well, Jeanette needs to eat right now, or Jeanette needs some water, or Jeanette needs some exercise, right? Stuff like that, to kind of encourage you to get outside of yourself. Because like I said, it can be really nice to care for other people, but we need to care for ourselves first. Self-care fills your cup. So how do you fill your cup? You want to pick activities that replenish you. So there are a couple of them here that you can see. I will say that beware of things like TV, podcasts, and social media, because they cannot be as replenishing as other things. I remember I did a training for it was Friends of the Family. It was we were talking about burnout because I was training to be a victim advocate, and they talked about things like television and social media, because those are things where it distracts us from the current moment, but it doesn't replenish. So I could leave and go watch an episode of Law and Order, but by the time the episode's over, like, I don't feel replenished. I didn't do anything to refill my cup. So definitely keep that in mind. If there are activities that are more used to distract you, you want to find activities that are going to replenish you. And yeah, somebody mentioned in the comments, social media can drain us. It's called doom scrolling, and it's, you know, everybody's favorite activity right now. Social media can actually take more out than it can put in. So limiting our time on that can be a real boon to our health. Also, I wanted to talk about, you know, things like therapy. You know, if you need help, definitely reach out. I have a therapist, and I also attend support groups. And I just wanted to say self-care doesn't just happen. You have to work at it. You need to find an accountability buddy, set timers, pencil it into your planner, find a support network that is going to help you. Thankfully, I have a partner who reminds me to eat. Because sometimes I'll just be typing away, working away, and he'll just pop up and be like, oh, here's a plate of, you know, corn dogs, here you go. And so like, find somebody that you can depend on and who can help you kind of make self-care a habit. So go ahead and take to the chat, and I want to know, what are some self-care activities that fill your cup? So go ahead and pipe up in the chat and let us know, what are some self-care activities that can fill your cup, that replenish you? Once again, you guys have a lot of really good responses, so I want to go through and give them the attention that they deserve. So Julia says exercise and cooking, walking around her neighborhood. Cecilia says running, traveling, spending time with my nephew, movies. Pamela says boating and hiking. Oh, that sounds divine. Oscar says, picked up a guitar about a year ago, so I've been practicing a lot more than usual for obvious reasons because we have time and we're inside now. Yeah. Oh man, Kiana says exercising, reading, playing Monster Hunter World. Does sleeping count? Sleeping counts as self-care. If you feel sleepy, go take a nap. You know, listen to your body. Napping does count as self-care. Watching reruns, family, music. Oh, that's great. Diane says mosaic art. Forgive me, they're weed whacking outside my window. Ricky says walking, baking, crafts, being in nature. Oh, that's so important. Bonnie says sleeping and visiting friends in small groups. Bonnie, I hear you. I also have a pandemic pod with a friend who sees no one and we don't see anybody. So I get that totally. That's definitely something to look into. You know, quarantine can be quite isolating. I remember I went 2 months without seeing anyone and I about went nuts. I'm a very social person. Robert says vocational interests, gardening, music, poetry, writing, reading. A lot of reading, yeah, definitely more than watching TV. It definitely engages your brain and engages your imagination. Thomas had a really good tip to set an alarm on your phone. And then I really like that idea of spending the last 5 minutes or so in absolute quiet. I think my problem is I want to avoid my own thoughts. And so I put on a podcast or I put on a YouTube video or whatever. And then I wonder why I'm not fully there for something. So definitely taking that 5-minute break and sitting in absolute quiet, just being there, being in the moment can be really, really helpful. Early morning walks, Bonnie remembers her great trip to Canada, and reading. So I think you guys have got it. Like you know what to do, and now you just need to do it. I kind of want to leave you with this idea. So maintain that triangle to keep your flame burning. So you have the passion, you have the spark, just have those healthy boundaries and exercise self-care. And it's kind of a lifelong thing, it's never really done, but you know what to do. Julia says definitely it's a matter of prioritizing self-care, putting yourself first, putting that mask on. It's funny because I'm the person who really needs to hear this, so I'll probably, after I edit this video and put it up, I'll watch it and hear myself telling myself all this stuff, and maybe then I'll take my own advice. So thank you so much. You've completed the webinar. I'm going to drop the link to the attendance and to feedback in the chat. And so leave me feedback there. Also reward yourself with something nice today and, have a really great day. I appreciate you guys taking the time to be here with me.